there's nothing to be gained by denying it or explaining it away or pretending that I didn't have a problem with alcohol. But I will say that I didn't really know I had a problem with alcohol until suddenly it was undeniable. And I'm guessing that other people have had that experience or are having that experience now.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Matt Rodbard. Laurie Woolever is a longtime journalist and has written a memoir for the ages. Care and Feeding covers her time working as a dutiful assistant to both Mario Batali and Anthony Bourdain, and her life entangled in and around the most important people in food for over 2 decades. It's a wild ride, and Laurie covers her ups and downs with a strong voice and biting wit. On this episode, we hear all about her work, from booking flights to writing magazine features, and how her addiction to drugs and alcohol nearly brought it all crashing down. This is a modern recovery story and a must-read for anybody interested in her megawatt former bosses. Also on the episode, I'm joined by Rebecca Flint Marks. Rebecca is Eater's at-home editor and leads the publication's cookbook coverage. She just published a massive spring preview, and we go over so many wonderful books being published this season. I hope you enjoy this episode. Laurie Woolever, welcome to This Is Taste. It's so great to see you.
Thank you. It is really a pleasure to be here.
This conversation, I've been looking forward to it for weeks because I read your book in a few days, your memoir, Care and Feeding. First off, great title. Everyone says that. Terrific title. It's terrific.
Thank you.
And I want to say from the jump, this is my observation and not anything to do with you, but like you were Anthony Bourdain's assistant for 10 years and you worked on 3 books with him and you're, very much Tony's in the book. I have to say there's nothing that Tony wrote that is better than what you've written. I say that with full confidence. I think this is such a literary work, and I think everyone should read it.
Wow. Well, thank you. Those are some big words.
Let me just ask you from the jump, what did you feel you really wanted to say about celebrity chef culture? You were Mario Batali's assistant. You were Anthony Bourdain's assistant. You worked at many publications as an editor at a time in the 2000s and 2010s, which was like the pinnacle of the celebrity chef. Mm-hmm. So I would imagine when thinking about your memoir, this was a rich text.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that time, if you may recall, Gourmet magazine. I think it was Gourmet. Maybe it was Food and Wine. One of the 2 big ones put a fake rock band on the cover of the magazine, and it was Eric Ripert and Laurent Gras and I think Suzanne Goen, and I forget who the 4th one was, but they were sort of some of the biggest chef names at the time.
Chang, perhaps?
No, it was a little pre-Chang.
Pre-Chang, okay.
It was early 2000s. Yeah. And I think the title, or the cover line was like, "Chefs are the new rock stars." It couldn't have been a more kind of beat you over the head idea that these are the rising stars of entertainment, and food and restaurants, dining and cooking are the new theater, opera, movies, books, what have you, the new culture. So that was a really interesting time to be coming up as a food writer. And I think it was probably a more credulous time and a time, and I don't fault anyone. I think, why would you not start out giving everyone the benefit of the doubt? Why would you participate in a culture where you're suspicious of everyone's motivations or their behavior behind the scenes?
It was a time of optimism, and we certainly wanted, I think people who had been writing about food before The Celebrity Chef wanted more eyeballs on food as a cultural thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. There is Andrew Friedman did a great book about the Food Network, the history of the Food Network, that really kind of lays it all out, the why and the when and the who and the how of how that all rose concurrently with the focus in media and all the other forms of media on the idea of the celebrity chef. So it was what a great bird's eye view I had of that world for a long time.
Was it Batali on the cover?
I'm sure he wouldn't. He was not part of that rock star quartet. I wish I could remember who the other
I know, because I vividly remember this, and I think it was dragged pretty quickly before drag was even a term.
It was Dean. I think it was Dean Fearing.
Dean Fearing,
the
yeah.
Fourth. But I'm sure, at some point Mario was probably on the cover of Gourmet. I mean, he had, he was saturated into the media culture at that time.
Well, let's start there with Mario. After culinary school, which you write about in the book, really, I think some of the best writing about culinary school and like real talk about culinary school, not all positive. You clearly have deep skills in the kitchen, and you end up as Mario's assistant, and you're working at Babbo during, you would say, the beginning of the Crazy Go-Go era, when, he received major acclaim, both in like the New York Times and through the book Heat, but also on Food Network. So this is like a time of Mario's like real, I would say, growth in the industry.
Absolutely. I was in the kitchen. I was working in the Garde Manger station at Babbo the night that they found out they had won James Beard Best New Restaurant in 1999. And that was massive. It was so exciting. This, again, it was like a more credulous time. I think this was pre the scandal that broke and remade the James Beard Foundation. So there was just, it was just pure excitement, pure pride and joy in having, earned this award. It was an amazing time. Now, I mean, the book Heat that you mentioned, that actually, so Bill Buford had come in initially just to do a profile of Mario, and then ended up expanding it into a book and making it as much about his own cooking journey as about Mario. That didn't come out till a few years after I started working, or I stopped working with Mario, but it was in the works at that time. But there was this period of several years for Mario where he had already been on the Food Network, but he got back on, kind of retooled Molto Mario, made it into a participatory format, which I think people really liked. I found it fun. I got to participate in some of the casting of getting people onto the set. I sat in myself a couple times. He expanded his restaurant empire. He went into business with Joe Bastianich, and they opened up a number of places in New York and eventually expanded beyond New York. We wrote and published the Babbo Cookbook. It felt like the center of everything that was happening in food culture, at least in New York and probably more broadly in the U.S.
We'll talk about the cookbook because I have a couple questions there. But while all of this is happening, of course, there's the ugly side of Mario Batali, and you write very clearly how he assaulted you and many others. I do not want to relitigate Mario and overshadow your work, and this will be my last question about him. But explain, your relationship with Mario.
Yeah, I always, I flinched a little bit when you said that he assaulted me. This is a semantic discussion, and I never really saw it that way. And I still, I think maybe out of a sense of deference to people who have experienced something far worse. The truth is he grabbed my ass at work, which I understand in a legal context is often considered assault. For me, it was, I think, because it was so common.
Yeah.
And that was as far as it went. That anyway, just
you stood up for yourself right away.
I did,
and you write about this moment, and it never happened again.
Right. The other incident that I wrote about briefly in the book, and that I did speak with some journalists anonymously in 2017, was just a kind of a silly thing, but ultimately, in retrospect, I could see that it was gross and a power play. Was we were together on a flight. And I needed to get up. He was on the aisle and I was on the window, and he needed to get up and use the restroom. And he was, had his feet up. It was a business class seat. So he had his legs up and he was tilted back, and he refused to move. And he said, if you want to get out, you got to straddle me. You got to go up and over. And, that was not great. Not how you want to be interacting with your boss.
Definitely not. And thank you for sharing that. And I'm sorry that happened to you. And I would say, a listener, pick up the book and know that these moments are only moments in the book. And Laurie has such a crazy story to tell, and amazing work with capturing the color of the time And I don't want to talk about Mario Batali anymore. I do want to talk about the Baba Cookbook, though, because you worked on it very, you were very much a part of this important book that, won awards. And it was your start in cookbooks, and this is what your career, you've co-authored and written many books. I just want to hear a little bit about what it's like to make a cookbook, 20 plus years ago.
So this was the second book of Mario's. He had published one called Simple Italian Food that came out, I think, in maybe 98. We were selling copies of it at Babbo, from my first day. And this was exactly what it sounds like, the Babbo cookbook. So from very early on in my job, I would work with the cooks and chefs in the kitchen, borrow the kitchen Bible, as they like to call it, the recipe book, and take these, much larger quantity recipes, try and scale them down for the home cook. I had a million questions. I think it's more common now, but at the time there were all these words on the menu that I had no idea what they meant. This was just all new to me, and there wasn't a lot of explanation. I think that was sort of that led to this kind of feeling of like, are you in the know? Are you an insider? Do you know what ceci means? Do you know what, all these words now that are sort of second nature to me, but all these Italian words, I'm like, is that a fish? Is that a vegetable?
And you didn't have
is that
the
a
internet
condiment? And we didn't have the internet
to help you.
Yeah.
Like, writing books, you use resources and you interview people, but you, of course, use online resources, but you didn't have that.
Right. So I remember going to the New York Public Library and pulling old copies of magazines, pulling reference books. I would go up to Kitchen Arts and Letters bookstore here in New York and sit with, rare copies of the In Bocca series. I don't know if people are familiar with that, but these really special regional Italian cookbooks, which I believe were only in Italian. So I was having to do a lot of, translation on the fly with a little book in my lap. I mean, it was just very analog.
Yeah.
And we never did I don't know if we ever had the internet at the restaurant. This was early days of that feeling like a necessary thing to have to be able to work. So it was, a multi-year process of working through each of these recipes, making them into a home cook format, giving them the standardized. We were published by Clarkson Potter, so it was working with their style guide. Working with Pam Krause was the editor. I learned so much from her. She was very patient, and of course, she had already had this amazing career. So that was a real privilege. And over the course of from the beginning of 1999 is when I started working for Mario and started working on this book, and it was published in spring of 2002, and I left probably 4 or 5 months after that.
Well, it really makes, as an author myself, I never had to write a book under those situations. I cannot imagine my brain is broken that you did not have really the internet. And it's still, do you look at the book at all these days?
I do. I have a copy. I think it's great. I think, knowing now, having 25 years experience, more writing, researching, reading, learning, cooking, I might do some things differently, but I do think it stands up. We had every recipe tested by an outside tester, and that I'm like, thank God, because I was young and I was straight out of cooking school and I knew what I knew, but there was a lot I didn't know. So, I mean, as you well know, a cookbook is a collaboration between a few dozen people. There are the authors' names on the cover of the book, but there's a lot of people's labor and love that goes into making something like that.
Yeah. So, Laurie, your journalism career takes off, and you end up leaving Babbo, and you're writing freelance for a number of places, and you end up as an editor at both Art Culinaire and Wine Spectator. This is a time of great change in media. I think it's a part of this book is capturing this era where magazines are still magazines, and there's really not a lot of digital, but there's are a few people, and you were one of them, particularly at Wine Spectator, who was working online. And I think it's a rare opportunity to hear somebody who worked at this era of great change and, describe that time of putting pages to bed, but also thinking about digital video in such a short amount of time.
Well, the first stop was at Art Culinaire, which was resolutely not in the digital age. We had a website that was basically, I don't even know if you could order a subscription through it. I think it was sort of a very brief archive. If you wanted to see if a chef had been in it, you could enter their name into this very rudimentary search function. Yeah. It was very basic, and none of the content was online. And I think this was still a time. I started in 2004. This was a time where I think there was still this sense of trying to protect the content and not give it away, which is fair. So that was still an extremely analog process of putting that magazine together. And because of the nature of what it was and still is, it's now published under a different publisher. It's a big, oversized, beautiful, heavy, glossy paper, color photographs. It's a really tactile experience. And you can see those photos online, but I think there is something so valuable about the physical media of it, and I'm really glad that it still exists. And then I went on to Wine Spectator, and I was hired as a web editor. I think I was associate web editor.
It was called Web.
Yeah.
Really, really tells you about the era.
Is that something that people don't even say anymore?
I think that web is probably used once in a while. But
it's digital, right?
Yeah,
that's
digital.
People say now.
Because, it's not just online. It's like social.
Right. And I remember, I think I wrote about this in the book, my boss at Wine Spectator explaining to me the concept of social media. And I've always been kind of a late adopter and a real skeptic about new things. So I was like, that sounds stupid. Like, what self-respecting adults are going to waste their time? That sounds so dumb.
It's so interesting because, Laurie, you're quite the tweeter. You're prolific and
well, I'm off Twitter to be clear.
Well,
but I'm Instagram. I am active on Instagram.
All right, you're active on IG. So, but I think back when Twitter was a thing, you certainly were.
I had a little bit of a Twitter life, but I couldn't see it. I mean, don't hire me to do trend forecasting.
Yeah.
So at Wine Spectator, it was very separate, web and print, which isn't to say that sometimes your work on web couldn't cross over to print. And that was a really exciting time. But it was day to day, you were either producing content for the web or you were producing for print. I think everyone was, and probably to an extent still is, trying to figure out what's the business model that's going to keep us solvent. And so at the time, it was everything that was in the print magazine was paywalled on the website. And then there was all this quote unquote free content that we would create for the website. So it changed a lot in the 2 years that I was a full-time staffer there. But there was definitely a culture siloing in the office. I mean, we were at the time we were on Park Avenue South, and we had a couple of floors of an office building, and the web was on 2 and print was on 8. And it was a big difference.
Yeah, I'm sure the 8th floor the offices were a little different too.
They had better light.
Yeah.
I will say, because Cigar Aficionado is also published under the same company, those offices smelled like cigar smoke. So I felt lucky to not be subjected to that.
Oh my gosh, I interviewed for an editorial assistant position at Cigar Aficionado. It was like one of my first. Yeah, it didn't work. That was I walked out there and I was like, I don't really smoke cigars. But anyways,
I'm Nomi Fry.
I'm Vincent Cunningham.
I'm Alex Schwartz, and we are Critics at Large, a podcast from The New Yorker. Guys, what do we do on the show every week?
We look into the startling maw of our culture and try to figure something out.
That's right. We take something that's going on in the culture now. Maybe it's a movie, maybe it's a book, maybe it's just kind of a trend.
And we expand it across culture as kind of a pattern or a template.
Join us on Critics at Large from The New Yorker. New episodes drop every Thursday. Follow wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm glad you kind of give us a little bit of color about this era that many don't even know about, when the web was like the second-class citizens of a publication.
100%. We would have these wine giveaways. There was always so much wine coming into the office, and they tried to control. It was not a free-for-all. So it was like certain weeks there would be a wine giveaway, and the print staff got first dibs. So they would take all the good stuff.
That says everything right there.
Yeah.
So Anthony Bourdain enters your world, Laurie, and you work on a cookbook with him, and you end up as his assistant. And I think you write very beautifully about your relationship with him, which gives a lot of insight into how Tony ran his business. And it was very much an online relationship. You weren't sitting next to him at a desk. You were corresponding via email. I think you have a funny moment where you see him in a crowd and you introduce yourself as his assistant after years of being his assistant. I think that's really important to understand Tony. But give us a sense. I mean, Laurie, what's it like as a day-to-day assistant for Anthony Bourdain?
Well, it was a work from home job for the most part at a time, well before COVID, where this was not really what most people did. So that I absolutely loved.
Yeah.
I had a little baby at home. I think when I started working for Tony, my son was 9 months old. And so it was such a relief to be able to be at home. I still took my kid to daycare because I wouldn't have gotten anything done, but it was 2 blocks away. And then I could go pick him up at, 3 in the afternoon. So that was great. And he understood that because his daughter is about 18 months older than my son. So he knew what it was like to have a young child and to feel the pull toward home. And it was pretty straightforward. There were just my email was I was never not checking my email. I was never not looking at my texts. For a while, I had 2 phones. One was the Tony phone and one was my personal phone. At some point, I gave up the personal phone.
Yeah.
I was like, really, why should I have 2 phone numbers? Just having 2 physical phones started to feel sort of silly. Because you just never knew, especially when he was traveling, he was in 10 different time zones in the course of a couple of months. And so for him, bright and early, 9 a.m. on a weekday morning, he might be in Korea, but he's got a question or he's got something he needs to be connected with or whatever it is. I want to be there for him as quickly as possible. And it's not to say that he was demanding. Like, he wasn't like, you must answer me within 30 minutes. That was not his vibe at all. But I felt like I want to do the best possible job for this guy. He has handed me this incredible opportunity and he doesn't ask a lot of me and he pays me well. And I want to, as much as I can sort of over-deliver for him, I want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like in reading your book, he's a generous boss and he's empathetic towards you as an employee, which I think is really reassuring to hear about. And when you're in his calendar, what are you learning about this individual? I mean, it's what a mindfuck. It's like, this is a gentleman who everyone knows on the planet. You're talking to him mostly online, not really physically sharing space with him. So you know him intimately, but you don't really know him because you're not really hanging out with him the way everyone literally on the planet wanted to be Tony Bourdain's assistant. You were there, but you really weren't there.
Yeah. One thing I learned is that he was extraordinarily busy, which I think is not a surprise to anyone really, but just to really see what it looks like to travel that much because he was in every episode. He had different kind of rotating crews that would, if you went to Vietnam, then you're going to come home and you're going to have some time to recover. And the other crew is going to go to Budapest, right? But he's at every single shoot. So just the time that takes and then the voiceover sessions and the writing that's due and all of everything, the promotional periods with the network, everything that goes with that, how much time that takes out of a person's life. And then everything else he had going on. He had a publishing imprint. He had a partnership with Roads and Kingdoms. I mean, he was just extraordinarily busy.
Yeah, it's remarkable. And I worked at 0.0 for a couple of years and I got to witness how he was so hands-on with production. And I'm sure you experienced that just dealing with his calendar. But what's something that maybe our listeners don't know about Tony from this time when you were his assistant? I mean, it sounds like, in reading your oral biography, which is a tremendous work and a New York Times bestseller, you interview so many people throughout his life about his workaholism, his intensity. But what is something that maybe our listeners don't know about Tony as a person?
Something that I learned about him while he was around and then more so after he was gone was that his life, as fun and exciting and full of people as it looked, could often be kind of lonely.
Yeah. It's and reading your biography, there's lots of people who had the same, impression of him after his death. And I mean, was that loneliness something that allowed him to just go deep with Parts Unknown, and just like with his writing, it felt like there's a cathartic element of Tony's writing and just his voiceover on the shows, which he also wrote. There's just like maybe that loneliness created this dynamic that just works so well.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to speculate now about, what his motivations were, or what, where his, I mean, he was naturally talented. He was extraordinarily curious. He was a voracious reader. He was a skeptic, and he was open to having his mind changed and learning something new about a situation. So all of those things, I think, contributed to his, the quality of the work that he did. I think the loneliness in some ways was a function of his success. I think, and again, this was told to me a lot by people in the interviews for the oral biography, that once upon a time, everyone was in the same production van. Everyone stayed in the same cheap hotels. They shot all day together, and then they might have a drink at the bar of the hotel afterward. And there was a kind of a group camaraderie. And as he got bigger, as the budgets got bigger, as the shoots got longer, as his life got more complicated, there were all these ways in which he sort of got separated from the group by choice, I think, in some ways. He wasn't on the ground for an entire shoot. He had his own car. He would stay at the Four Seasons, and everyone else would stay at the Ramada. All of these things where he used to be out with a gang, which probably, I believe, reminded him in some ways of the kitchen dynamic. Now he was he was the isolated star. And I think that's when you're far away from home and your family and your creature comforts, I think that can be incredibly lonely. Yeah,
that self-isolation it seemed like it was a choice just from reading your work and reading the unauthorized biography as well. And it's kind of stunning to think about when that Parts Unknown was created that way, because I think everyone who watched the show assumed the latter, that he was like hanging out with everyone and was like the Anthony Bourdain, but much more complicated than I think the audience would realize.
Yeah, and there were times, I read about this in the book also, I went to Sri Lanka with the crew, and there were times when he would say, hey, let's all hang out. Let's go up to the hotel roof and when we're done with the shoot, and we're going to get some chicken and whiskey. And talking to the people on the crew, that would happen. It seemed to happen on these far away, long shoots halfway around the world, where everyone, I think, needed a little camaraderie more so than if you were just in Detroit or something.
Yeah. That was a great scene, by the way. You almost lose your purse, and it's like written with such pace. It's like a little bit of like this action sequence in the book, and it's such great writing. And
thank you.
It felt like he was like a little over that shoot. Maybe that's just the product of doing a 12-day shoot in a country you just don't want to deal with anybody. Because like you think of Tony Bourdain as someone who's like going down back alleys every meal possible. We obviously know that's impossible as anyone, but he wanted like bad KFC in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, we were in this country with extraordinary food and really interesting flavor combinations, and really just sort of obviously influenced by India, but different from India. And I was really in love with the food there. The scene that you're talking about, we had just come from this really intense religious devotional festival, and he and I were in the car being driven out of the scene, and there's this parade literally just eddying all around us, really intense displays of physical devotion, and it's just not something you see every day. And I'm riveted, and he's like, texting with his girlfriend and like looking at page 6 on his phone. And it's just, it just speaks to like, at some point, you feel like maybe, even if you haven't, you feel like maybe you've seen it all.
Yeah.
Or you're already on to the next thing when everything is available to you, literally in the whole world, it's nothing is interesting.
Please read Laurie's oral biography for more about Tony's life. And I think that you get into a lot of that with this book about his isolation and his mental health, which you can only speculate, but it's through the voices of people who know him. It's obvious that you're talking about Sri Lanka, that you ended up on the road with Tony. You left your home. You weren't just on the laptop. And you got to travel with him quite a bit. And I think there's a really memorable scene at the Chateau Marmont. And I think anyone who knows Tony's work, he loved that place. I believe he have his apartment designed like the chateau, or is that a different hotel?
No, yeah. It was, he rented an apartment, and the furnishings and the art and the rugs and the carpets were all chosen to look like the Chateau Marmont.
Yeah, his New York City apartment to look like chateau. So he had great devotion to that hotel. But you're there for a People magazine photo shoot. It's with Roy Choi and Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age. And you're like playing bartender. You're like running errands. There's like a photo shoot. The dynamic seems like really up and down. I mean, what's it like in this scene at the chateau with all these characters, all these men?
All these men. Yeah, it was, well, in addition to Tony and Josh and Roy, there were probably 24 people there from People magazine or hired by People magazine to create this effortless seeming scene of just a couple guys eating sausage and peppers on a balcony at the Chateau Marmont. I mean, it's absurd if you really think about it. But there were a couple of food stylists, and there was a video team, and there was the photographer and his people. There was the writer. There was somebody else to do an interview for the video. It was, yeah, it all felt sort of crazy, but I think it's probably much more normal than I realized at the time, that this is what it takes to get a photo for a magazine, to promote a book and a television show. It was fun. I remember feeling like I better look busy. I don't really have a job to do here. Yes, I am the co-author of the book, but no one's going to interview me. I think the photographer, out of pity, took a couple of photos of me, but I knew they weren't going to be in the story. It was just sort of a chaotic day. It was fun. I mean, Tony, in some ways, was playing host. He had this great big suite at the Chateau Marmont, and so there was room for everyone. This big, beautiful couch, I remember, plus the balcony. Roy's business partner Natasha was there, and that was great. So it was in some ways really fun, and in some ways just sort of overwhelming and absurd.
Yeah, People magazine, that era, they're just going over the top with these photo shoots, and I'm sure that's just a symptom of the era that they needed these.
Oh, it wasn't that long. I mean, it was I guess it was 9 years ago now.
9 years. So. I guess People's still doing it 9 years ago. Laurie, last question about Bourdain. I just want to know, just in reporting the oral biography. And speaking to so many people in his life after he dies, what's your general takeaway about Anthony Bourdain's legacy?
Well, there is this movement to sort of canonize him and make him into a saint. And as much as I think he was a great guy, a great boss, I miss him incredibly. And I think he put a lot of good into this world. He was a fallible human being with moods and thoughts and actions and decisions that were human. And I would like to think that the oral biography does sort of shed a light on that. It is not a hagiography, but it's also not a, filthy tell-all.
Yeah, that book was done.
So yeah, just that, he was a human being, and it's very tempting to just sort of, I think about the example of David Lynch, right, who just died a few weeks ago, and there's been this tremendous outpouring of like, oh, he was our greatest filmmaker, I love Twin Peaks, I love Mulholland Drive, I think his work is great, but he was not a great filmmaker. I don't know, maybe that's very, very controversial to say, but he made great, beautiful moments, right? But it's like, everyone glosses over the fact that Inland Empire is unwatchable. That Lost Highway, it's like, what the fuck? The second season of Twin Peaks is like, come on. You know, granted, he had kind of walked away at that point. But so I think it's the same. It's like you can love and respect and admire the work of this person. And I don't think we have to go over the top and immediately be like, get into the superlatives and, you know, greatest of all time. We can still, you know, use a slight critical eye. And I think Tony would appreciate that. I can only speculate. But, you know, I think he found it very embarrassing when people were effusive about his work. You know, he was very quick to correct people and say, you know what, I wasn't a great chef. You know, there's this kind of assumption that people make about someone if they've achieved any level of success at all. So, yeah, I think to keep him as a human being who did a lot of great things. But I'm not in charge of his legacy.
No, well said. Lynch is taking L's today on the podcast, but no, I think it's really well said, and I think the next 20 years of Bourdain content is going to be very interesting because we've been given space from the moment a lot has been written. But that's the end of Bourdain. I want to ask you a broad question because you know we've covered this very rich career, and you've been in such unique spaces. And I just read this book, people. It's so well written, and I just mean it like it's not like you've got real talent. And I think part of why this book is so special is because while you're living this life, and we haven't even said this word, you have an addiction, and you are battling it. It is like your enemy. It is like the big boss in a video game, and you're not quite there to the end of the video game throughout the whole book. You're in recovery now, and you're doing well. So it ends well. Spoiler. Well, good
I'm alive.
For you. Yeah, you're alive. You're here. But Laurie, why was it so important to really reveal what addiction means and what addiction did to your life?
Well, it's, you know, it is inextricably bound up with my story of my work and my ups and downs as a writer and as a parent and a spouse and a friend. And I think there's nothing to be gained by denying it or explaining it away or pretending that I didn't have a problem with alcohol. But I will say that I didn't really know I had a problem with alcohol until suddenly it was undeniable. And I'm guessing that other people have had that experience or are having that experience now. And man, if you can drink responsibly and healthily, like God bless, you know, what a gift. But there are a lot of people that can't or that are not or who haven't. And I will say that in my own experience, listening to podcasts, reading things, you know, maybe watching certain films or documentaries, seeing other people have this experience and talk about it, for me, it was really helpful and really helped move me toward a place of like, oh, I think I have a problem. Maybe there's another way for me to live. So if I can add to that body of work that's out there that can help someone examine if maybe there's another way for them to live that might save their life or make their life better or make their family life better, then, you know, why wouldn't I do that?
Well, it's a powerful read because it's not like you discover 12-step and then it ends. Like you're battling it. Like you have enough intelligence and you know yourself enough that you have this feeling that something is wrong, and that being in these situations, you know, where alcohol is at the center and just the amount of drinking. And I think it's important to obviously note that you work in an industry where alcohol is freely flowing everywhere. I think it's gotten better as working in food in the industry, but it was really, you know, it was always there. And I think that's really powerful. And I want to ask you about 12-step because I think many listening to our show and folks have written in about it, and I think that's beautiful, and please do. Like 12-step maybe has a stigma. Maybe it's not for everyone, but it sticks for you. I'd love to get your take about 12-step and how that affected you and changed your life.
Yeah, I was very skeptical at first, but I had a friend who I write about in the book, a colleague who had gone through it a few years before me. And I, you know, the day that I decided, well, let me try one of these meetings and see, you know, I'm not going to, no promises, but I'm going to try it. And so he told me where to go and what to do. And, there was enough there for me listening to people tell their stories, watching people share the fact that they had 1 day sober, 10 days sober, 2 months, 9 months, whatever it was. And this thing that people often say at the end of a meeting, which is keep coming back. And so it was, there are a million little sayings and cliches that one hears in a 12-step meeting or sees in the literature. And they're so simple, a lot of them, just as to be kind of, you almost want to dismiss them, right? I mean, one of them is keep it simple, But if you can find a way to, like I did, to keep going back, it starts to take on some meaning. I don't know. I mean, it's not for everyone. Some people, there are a million reasons that people give for not giving it a chance or not sticking with it, and I respect that. And one of the other things about the 12-step programs are that it's a program of attraction, not promotion, right? So you're never going to see advertisements for this or that anonymous. It's just not how it works. It's not a business, right? So if people have questions, I talk to them about it. I mean, God, I sound like a Scientologist.
I mean, you don't, and I think it's very helpful. And I'm going to link to a resource in the show notes. So if you're interested in a 12-step program, you feel like you may be experiencing addiction, that link will be there. And just to close this part of the interview, what got you to that meeting that finally stuck? I don't mean like the fall down moment, but like what drove you to that meeting?
Honestly, it was a weekend. I know you were there because I remember seeing. I think we were on the same flight down. It was a conference in
Louisville, Kentucky.
Louisville, Kentucky.
I was there. You were at one, and you write about a party that we hosted.
Yeah,
you were there. I remember. Yeah.
It was a big culinary conference in a hotel, and bourbon country, right? So there was tons of bourbon, and there was tons of everything else. And I got on the plane that morning at LaGuardia, so hungover, and got to the hotel and started drinking, and that was just. And that had been a pattern for me for a long time. It's something about just being so in the thick of it that weekend really, I don't know why. It opened my eyes a little bit. And I woke up that Saturday morning with my hands shaking, and that was new. And I thought, oh, that's not good. This is, I've got all kinds of psychological, emotional evidence that maybe this is not great, but now I'm starting to see the physical evidence, and that might have been the straw. And I drank like an absolute fish that weekend, and I missed my flight home on Monday morning because I think I went to bed at like 4 a.m. on Sunday, and I had a 6 a.m. flight. Something really stupid. So it was just like, I'd been taking those quizzes online for months. Am I an alcoholic? It's like, if you're taking the quiz, you're an alcoholic.
Yeah. Well said.
So, all of that. I do want to say one more thing, which it wasn't entirely linear for me. I think that people have this idea that you go to your first AA meeting and the clouds part and you never drink again and you're all in 100%. And I don't know I think that does happen for some people. For me, I was going to the meetings, and I was still getting stoned. I wasn't drinking. And, I thought maybe I can just get away with getting stoned. And if I was stoned at a meeting, I wouldn't talk. But if I, and I knew, it was clear that it's like, this isn't real sobriety. You're just not drinking. So it took me 18 months to really, for me, commit to it, to the whole thing, and to get over my aversion to this idea of a higher power. I think that's what really takes a lot of people out, is this idea that it's a Christian or it's a God-centered program. Yeah. Higher power can be a cup of coffee. It can be a tree in your neighborhood. It can be, your concept of human cooperation. It doesn't have to be capital G, God.
Yeah. Laurie, the book is amazing. Care and Feeding is the title, and please, again, I'm going to link to the show notes. Buy the book. It's terrific. I can't leave you without asking about a book that you worked on that we published here that we've mentioned on the show a number of times, Richard Hart Bread.
Mm.
Really terrific book. I would say it's like intermediate to advanced. It's got some real deep dives. I mean, it's a serious bread book. What was that like working with Richard Hart on this terrific cookbook?
It was a trip. It was so much fun. I will say, despite having gone to cooking school and worked in various capacities around food, I had never in my life made sourdough bread before I started working on this book. So yes, it's a maybe it's intermediate to advanced, but I was a raw beginner when I first started, and I screwed up. And my first starter grew like wavy filaments of mildew.
Yeah.
I just didn't.
Not good for flavor.
Not good for flavor. No, it was pretty bad. So it was fun. It was a long process. We started working together in the summer of 2021, and the book just came out at the end of 2024. So these things always take a long time. I think it was well worth the time that we put into it. I got to go to Copenhagen 3 times to work with Richard in the bakery at the original Hart Bakery in Copenhagen and Frederiksberg. And I learned so much. I laughed my ass off. Richard is just a delightful, singular person.
Yeah.
So full of knowledge, but couldn't be less pretentious about it. He wants everybody to make bread. He has no patience for the microclimate food nerds that are getting into deep dives into the science. He's just like, it's just flour and water.
Yeah.
You'll see when you talk to him. You'll see.
Yeah, he's gonna be on the show soon, and like getting his voice was so important. You did a terrific job getting that down. And I mean, how do you tackle a bread book while being? I mean, you went to culinary school, but like you're not a bread baker. What's that like, just for you as a collaborator, to work with this like pretty legendary baker on this big book?
Yeah, I had to really get immersed. I was the first time I went to Copenhagen, I was there for 17 days or something, and I was in the bakery every day, and I'm just walking around, recording our conversations, writing down notes, asking a million questions. My hands are in the dough. I learned to shape loaves. It really was. I had to truly get immersed because I did not know anything, and I think that was actually a great position to be in as a writer, because I wasn't shorthanding anything with everyone knows that. Well, I didn't know it, so maybe the reader doesn't know it either. So yeah, it was a full immersion. And then of course he was in Copenhagen and I live in New York, and so we were just on Zoom, every day for weeks and weeks and weeks at a time, just talking, working through things. I baked so much bread in my kitchen, and that also was like, I didn't need a big professional oven or any special equipment to make 99.9% of the bread.
Great.
The panettone, you kind of do need.
That's a wild recipe that you did a panettone. Damn. Respect.
Yeah. You do need a few additional things for that, but if you want to take that journey, it's very rewarding. It's the best panettone I've ever had.
I bet. Are you still baking bread? Do you have a practice?
I do. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I have a little. It's not as much. I'm not going through bags and bags of flour a week anymore, but I do have a little starter.
Got a little starter still. What's the name? Do you have a name for it?
I do not have.
You're not one of those. Yeah.
No.
I didn't expect you to at all. Well, Laurie, on This Is Taste, we ask guests about their discerning taste. So to close this interview, here's a little rapid fire, fast and furious taste check. Now, this has been a pretty serious conversation, but if you know Laurie Woolever, there's no funnier person online or IRL. You come to play with these. I didn't mean to set you up like that, but I just want, you're very funny. The best fruit.
Honeybell tangerines. Do you know these?
No, I don't actually.
They're so specific. They're so good. I get a box every year from my boyfriend, and they are just, if you hate oranges, if you hate citrus fruit, you will still love these. They are juicy, delicious. I think they're wildly expensive.
Yeah. Well, a gift. It's a gifting fruit.
Right.
Gifting fruit. Okay, the worst vegetable.
Ugh, yellow summer squash. Why? Why do you exist? Worst. It's like, let's just pack it full of seeds and water and pith.
It's always there at the farmer's market. It's just like, it's like smiling up at you.
They're like, it's 25 cents a pound, please. Take it.
I know. What's your typical breakfast?
I do a scrambled egg. Actually, it's sort of a flat omelet. This is This is like, I've been told this is gross. Flat omelet, cottage cheese,
Yo.
jam, or maple syrup.
I mean, it's working for me.
Mhm.
You're obviously protein maxing a bit, so
Yeah.
that's cool. But like, it's giving a little blincy.
Yes.
Giving a little
yes.
blincy?
I called it. I think you and I did a piece during COVID about breakfast, and I referred to it as the poor man's blintz, which was controversial. Listen, I am the poor man. I can't afford to go out for breakfast. I mean, are you kidding me? It's all the best parts of a blintz.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. The best dessert.
Coconut cake.
Wow.
Like a classic Peninsula Grill, South Carolina coconut cake. 3 or 4 layers with the filling that's different than the icing.
Yeah.
I love that. I make that a couple times a year. It's a big commitment of time, and then you've got a cake in your house that you have to deal with, and I can't stop eating it. It's my absolute favorite.
The coconut element, like that's got to be key. How are you buying coconut for this?
Oh, I just get the whatever's on sale at the supermarket.
Yeah. All right, straight talk. Okay.
Yeah.
It's just the technique of it is.
Yeah.
It's all about.
It's the technique. It's the all the elements together. It's the cake that's got to be a certain consistency. It's the creamy. It's basically you're making a custard as the filling, and that's got coconut in it. And then the icing is a cream cheese icing, and then I think it's got a cure for like 2 days. It's much better after it's been in the world for 2 days than it is on day one.
Yeah, no doubt. Oh man, amazing. Restaurant you wish you could bring back from the dead.
Okay, I have 2 answers here. The first one is the original M. Wells Diner in Long Island City.
Yeah.
Of course, M. Wells, I think, there was another iteration. I think they just closed in Long Island City. I went once. It was great, but I didn't have that kind of love connection that a lot of people had to it. I really loved the original diner. It was so, look it up if you don't know it. It was unbelievable. The other one is Cop's Canteen, which was the restaurant I worked in as a teenager in my hometown. It was the nicest restaurant in town. It was where everybody went. My friend and classmate Kevin Kopp, it was his family's restaurant. And it was where I got my start loving restaurants, even though I think I was kind of a miserable bus girl. But just the whole vibe of restaurants, I learned it there.
I love it. What's the special? What's the special there? What's good there?
Chicken fricassee. That was their
That
was their signature dish, and you could get a small or a large portion.
And this is upstate New York.
This is upstate New York, Chittenango, New York.
Yeah. Wow. What did you learn? And what like from that initial experience working at this restaurant, what drew you into the lifestyle?
I learned how to carry a tray on my shoulder. I learned how to really efficiently clear a table. I learned how to interact with the people in the kitchen to get what I wanted and not be annoying and stay out of the way. First thing I ever learned, and I think about this every time I get a delivery, is I learned how to break down a box.
Yeah.
I was like, what are you talking about? Like, and it was just like, here's how you break down a box and here's why we do it. And here's a stack of them and they're filthy. So, good luck.
Real life skills for real.
Yeah.
For real.
Yeah, absolutely. And, how to move around a dining room safely and efficiently and without attracting attention to yourself. How to flirt with the bartender to get him to give you drinks when you're 15.
Yeah. Your son's 16. Does he have a restaurant job lined up?
He doesn't. He's such a jock that his jobs are all like he's coaching a football team and he's coaching a baseball team, and that is his wheelhouse.
Yeah, I'm sure he's getting life skills there too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Your favorite city outside America to visit for food?
All right. I have a couple, and I'll just go through them quickly. I couldn't really choose one, so I'll just give you the top 4. And I feel like
4. Damn. All
right.
We can do
I'll
top.
I'll just do
Laura,
quick.
you get top 4. You're VIP here.
All right.
You're VIP.
Mexico City, Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Copenhagen.
I mean, yeah, you can't.
There are others. I mean, there's Lyon, there's Paris, there's a million of them, but those are the 4 that I have had extraordinary experiences in.
If you've ever been lonely in a hotel far away, you're going to recognize Laurie's writing about Tokyo. It's a really special couple sequences in the book. No spoilers. It's pretty wild. Please read this book. I'm going to keep saying that. Last one.
Mm-hmm.
Your favorite sandwich.
Oh, man. There is a sandwich at Ernesto's, and I should say I am working on the cookbook with Chef Ryan Bartlow of Ernesto's.
Very cool.
So I am deep in this sandwich right now, working on writing the recipe. It's called Bikini Hemingway, and it's like the best Monte Cristo / grilled cheese / I don't even know, panino.
Mm-hmm.
It's got cheese. It's got like a chorizo kind of whip almost, like a very soft sort of mixture of chorizo and other or actually, it's not even chorizo. It's a different kind of sausage. But in the book, it's probably going to be chorizo because that's what you can get your hands on. It's got shrimp. It's griddled.
Wow.
It's got
so cool.
It's got a slick of olive oil. It's got crunchy sea salt. It is like everything you want in a sandwich.
How do you land that plane for a home cook? Because you've got these like really big ideas. You're whipping sausage, but like this is the skill of you. This is like why this is like a really important job. Like, how do you take that emotion you just gave and like write a recipe that somebody in somewhere town is gonna make one day?
I think, probably all the adjectives that I just used and a few more. You have a beautiful photo, and you give people a couple of options because it's a real turnoff to be like, oh, I've never even heard of that sausage. I'm not going to make this, But you say like, well, at the restaurant we make it with chistorra sausage, but you can use chorizo, and here's how you do it. Give people a couple of options so that the essence of the thing remains the same, which is a crispy, chewy, rich sandwich, and let them feel that they can make it even if they're living in a place where they can't get their hands on all the exact ingredients.
Yeah, well said. And you do a podcast.
Yes.
What's the status? How's Chris? I haven't seen him in years.
Chris is great.
What's the podcast? What's it called?
The podcast is called Carb Face for Radio. We've been doing it for a very long time. Tony Bourdain was our opening executive producer, by which I mean he said, you guys can call me executive producer. I'm not going to lift a finger, but he did come in twice and we recorded some stuff with him. So he appears on the first couple episodes of the podcast. And we've been doing it for a long time now. Our first episode I think came out in early 2018. And we took some time off. But yeah, it's great. It's fun. It's a labor of love. I've never made a penny on it, and probably never will. But we get to talk to fun people, or we just talk to ourselves. Yeah. The format has changed throughout the years, but I really enjoy doing it.
Yeah, it's a fun listen. I'm a fan of the show. I remember when it launched. It was a little bit of an inspiration for launching this show, to be honest. We launched in 2018 as well, and I was like, Laurie's doing a cool thing with Chris. I gotta get on that podcast game. Laurie Woolever, what an amazing conversation. I love this book. I hope you come back. Thank you so much for joining This Is Taste.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Rebecca Flint Marks, welcome back. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Thank you. How are you doing, Matt?
Well, I'm great, Rebecca. I'm actually really great because we're going to talk about spring cookbooks. And you are the editor of Eater at Home, which means you are the cookbook editor by default at Eater. And you have just published such a terrific, recap, roundup, dissertation.
All the above.
All the above on the current season. And we're going to talk about so many titles. And I just love it. You've got great sensibility. You look at big publishers, you look at, smaller presses, and it's just a great survey. Before we get to that, though, I just want to know, where have you been dining out?
Well, so I was just in San Francisco for a week, actually.
Hell yeah.
And I lived in San Francisco for 4 years and try to go back every year or two. And we ate very, very well when we were out there. Lots of great places. One place we always go when we're there is a wonderful bakery in the Inner Richmond called Bread Belly. Do you know Bread Belly?
I was there on Sunday.
No kidding.
I was there on Sunday.
I just missed you then.
God. Tell me about it.
Oh my God. So their egg salad sandwich is, the sandwich?
I didn't have it, but I know of it.
Okay.
Tell me about it.
Next time you're there, you need to get this sandwich. Like, I have a photo. This was taken probably 2 years ago, the first time my husband and I went there. I have a photo of him eating this sandwich. I don't think I've ever seen him look this happy in real life. Like, it's just the best sandwich. Yeah, it's so good. But all of their baked goods are wonderful. We kind of had like a little baked good Fantasia when we were there because I also really wanted to try Loquat. Yeah, which is a great bakery that's in the old 20th Century Cafe space, R.I.P.
R.I.P.
Yeah, man, that was a great
that
place.
Cake, I had that. Oh, man.
Yeah, but their stuff was amazing. We went to Butter and Crumble, which is a new place in North Beach, stood in line for half an hour, met a really fascinating young woman who had a cookbook club, so we gossiped about that for a while. It was really interesting.
Was she thrilled to meet you, knowing your job?
She was, and we started getting into all the drama that can happen with cookbook clubs, and it's really fascinating.
That is a story. You can take that one. You just said it, but you're you give me some ideas here.
Yeah, no, there's where there's people, there's dramas. So that was great. I went to a new restaurant in the Presidio called Delita, which is from a couple of, do you know this place?
I wanted to go. I'm nodding because like you went on many places I went.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Fabulous place. Loved it. Beautiful, beautiful setting. Very good food. Also went to a really interesting place in North Beach called, it's either Hilda and Jesse or Jesse and Hilda. I always forget the order. But
okay. One of those two?
Yeah, fun place, really interesting place. And then I went to Rentaro, which is one of my favorites. It's in the Mission. Wonderful place, Japanese food. I went there. Where else did we go? Beit Rima, which is more Middle Eastern. This is a thing we always eat very, very, very well. When we go.
I mean, the Inner Richmond, on fire.
Yeah.
So much great stuff there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was like really popping.
Yeah.
Thank you for the San Francisco survey. That was quite unexpected.
It's funny because like I don't eat out that much here in New York. I really hate to say that, but it's I'm usually cooking at home, to be entirely honest.
Well, that's in your title.
Yes.
Eater at home. So, most of your colleagues are out there, checking out the restaurants, but your remit is to focus on the in-home cooking, and it's just tremendous work. I love what you're doing. You're always thinking about the culture of cooking, and I just love it. So,
thank you so much. I appreciate that.
It's fantastic. Let's talk about the season broadly. And I know this is not like an easy question to answer, but I know you'll give it a try. Are there any broad, I would say maybe themes or impulses that you're seeing in this spring cookbook season?
Theme-wise, I would say, and I've seen this before as well, but I've been noticing it a lot this season. There's a lot of emphasis on family. There's a lot of emphasis, and what I mean is family is extremely present in the stories that cookbook writers are telling about their own lives, their own cuisine, how they've adapted the food they grew up with to the way they cook now. It's about, making time to spend with your loved ones. And I would say there's also, and again, I would not say this is new, but I think as ever, a lot of cookbook authors are really conscious of trying to make cooking easier and more accessible. And that even goes for chef cookbooks, which are famously not necessarily that accessible. And on a much more micro note, this is kind of a funny thing to notice. People's fingernails look amazing.
Right?
Oh my God. Like everybody's getting their manicures like on point before they do their shoots. Like, and I know this is, again, not a new thing. We actually did a story about nail art and cookbooks last year, I believe. It was Bettina McAlintel who wrote this story. And this is a trend I think is continuing, and more power to it. People's hands look amazing right now.
I love that micro note. And I so agree. Just like being here at Penguin Random House, in the weeds a bit with the book publications, it seems, food styling is at an all-time high.
Yes.
And that includes hands, and that includes the way food is being presented.
Yes.
We're seeing less and less of those, cloth napkins with the whoopsies, with like the random spice thrown on the napkin.
Yeah.
I mean, that does happen. It's fine. But like it's just something about the photography in this season. I see a lot of documentary too.
Yes, so much documentary. Everything is quite vivid. There is more mess, and I mean that in a good way. It's kind of an orchestrated mess, I would say, but I think it's definitely more trying to broadcast the feeling of like, you're at home and you're cooking, have fun, don't worry.
Love it.
Make a mess. Yeah.
Make a mess. It's okay. And as like the professional with the name on the cover, it's okay to mess up once in a while.
Exactly.
I see that a bit. Let me ask you, how do you put the list together? We work here at Penguin Random House, so we see all of our own titles, and of course I see a lot of other titles for the show, and we cover the world of cookbooks here. But there's so many, and I really respect you at Eater and your colleagues for putting in the work. Each capsule is written and tested, and not all the recipes, but some of the recipes are cooked. And how do you come up with the finalists? It's a really nice list.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So where we start is I and my associate editor, Kat Thompson, we have a lot of cookbook publishing publicity contacts. So we're always getting emails from them. And of course, a couple of months, 3 or 4 months before the season begins, we start getting, emails in earnest saying, here's the cookbooks we have coming up this season. So we're constantly, we have a cookbook document. It's a spreadsheet that we keep. So that's our master list of just all the books we're aware of, their dates, who wrote them, et cetera, the publishers. So we really keep updating that list really throughout the year. And so then once we have that list, and we really try to get as broad a survey as possible. But that said, there's a lot that comes out every year, and we're just not going to get all of it. There's probably hundreds of cookbooks that come out every season.
Oh, more.
Yeah.
Many more, absolutely.
Yeah. And so we do try, though, to keep a good survey of publishers. So it's not just the big five, for example. So we start from that list, and then I look through that list and I think, well, what's interesting to me? And then we sort of put it to the staff writers as well. We show everybody the list and say, just highlight the things you're interested in reviewing. After that, we go through that list. What's important to me is to, choose work that people have expressed a real interest in, because if you're asking staff writers who are already very busy to review something, you want them to be invested in it. But then the other thing that we really have to keep in mind is we want a good balance. We want a good mix. We want different cultures represented. We want different backgrounds represented, different cuisines, different approaches to cooking. So that it's really trying to find that good balance, and then mixing that with can we find writers who can review all these books?
Yeah.
And this season, actually, I think this is the most books we've ever included on our list. It's 20 books.
Yeah, I have the whole list in front of me, and it's amazing. And you really do, you capture exactly what you said, the range of voices and the size of the publisher is so all represented. I want to get into some specific titles.
Yeah.
And really, I'm not picking any that I like personally in particular. I just wanted to get your take on some titles, and we can always talk about more titles. I have the whole list in front of me. I don't think we're going to get to all 20, but we'll do our best. Okay. Ghana to the World.
Yeah, so that's Eric Ajapong. He is a chef who was born and raised in New York City, but his parents are both from Ghana. He wrote this book with Portia Wilson, who's a well-known food writer. So it's about basically his version of his cuisine, Ghanaian food, but then also the foods that influenced him when he was growing up, the foods he likes to cook now. I think he's probably best known as a chef who's done a lot of work with the Food Network. He was also on, I forget which season of Top Chef it was. It was whatever 2018 was, but he was a finalist on that show. And he got attention for the dish that he wanted to cook as a finalist, which was a dish that represented the transatlantic slave trade and its effect on different ingredients, around the world. And so this book it's a very beautiful book. He goes to Ghana. There's a lot of reporting from Ghana. The photographs are absolutely gorgeous, but it's interesting because his book, it's another book about West African cuisine, which is something we've been seeing a little more of in the past few years, which is wonderful. Yewande Komolafe had her book, Everyday Lagos. We also had In Bibi's Kitchen, Hawa Hassan. So this is really adding to that conversation. It's a very personal book. His story really comes through in its pages, and you really get a sense of the foods he grew up with and the foods he's trying to learn more about, and the foods that he really wants to, educate more people about this cuisine and this region of the world in particular. So, yeah, it's a beautiful book.
Beautiful book, and we're going to have Eric on the show, and I can't wait to have a conversation with him about his really terrific story, and definitely shout out to Portia Wilson. What a tremendous writer.
Yeah.
Love this book. So we have a lot of chef books that have popped up. A few include Scott Clark, titled Coastal, Nicole Rucker, Fat and Flour, Calvin Ang, Salt, Sugar, MSG, Rawia Bashara from Tannerine in Brooklyn. And that's like a wide range of cuisines and styles of restaurants. And I just am really heartened to see chefs get books. I think was like a little bit of a pause in publishing. I mean, there certainly were coming out, but there wasn't as many. And I mean, another tough question, but do you see anything that ties these chef books together? Anything you're seeing about chef books in particular?
Yeah, they're more accessible, honestly,
that.
in a word. I mean, they're still very much chef cookbooks, but like I think a lot of people, myself included, for a long time, sort of had this image of the chef cookbook as being something that you're never going to use at home. Like you might read through it, like you read through like, I don't know, the Hamacher Schlemmer catalog, if that's still a thing.
Oh my God, I love that reference.
Right?
I get it.
I can barely pronounce it, but
yeah. Hamacher Schlemmer?
Hamacher Schlemmer,
Yeah.
I think, or Schlemmer.
No, you did it.
Okay. There's a lot of sort of like spit involved with saying that name. In any case, yeah, where you're like, this is totally aspirational. I'm never going to like get an immersion circulator, right? So, but, you know, what we're really seeing this season, you know, previous seasons as well, is like chefs are kind of like letting their hair down a little bit. And they're cooking food that's very personal to them. So like Calvin Eng's book, for example, Salt, Sugar, MSG, you know, he's a chef who has a restaurant called Bonnie's, which is in Brooklyn, but he makes it very clear in his introduction, this is like a home cooking cookbook. And that really comes through in his recipes. He talks a lot about his family. So again, you get the theme of family that's coming into this. Scott Clark's book, Coastal, which is a book I personally reviewed, similar story. You know, he talks a lot about his upbringing. He talks a lot about just like the food that sort of shaped him. I've cooked out of this book. You know, there's definitely certain touches where you're like, yeah, a chef, a chef made this. But altogether, it's a book you can really cook from. And it's also a book that's just like, it's very sort of rough-hewn in its way. Like it's structured as like a California road trip down the Central Coast. So you really get a feel for like, it's kind of a weird word to use in this context, but just the textures of, you know.
Oh, I love this book. I had Betsy Andrews on. She'll be on a future episode, who wrote the book with Scott. And we had a long conversation about the photography in the book and really showing Scott's, you know, fine dining background, you know, really reflected in his more casual, big air quotes there because he's a chef, but his style of cooking. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. It's a really fun book and it's a beautiful book. And I love how irreverent it is. I'm always looking for irreverence in a cookbook.
Yeah.
Another one of those books, Nicole Rucker's Fat and Flour. You know, it has an interesting story because she, in her introduction, she talks about how she kind of burned out on baking for a time. And, you know, the cookbook that she's given us now is very much, you know, it's very like rigorous in the sense that like these are recipes that are going to work. But at the same time, it's fun. There's just a lot of fun to her book. Like, here's a bunch of different spins on the chocolate chip cookie. Here's a bunch of different spins on banana bread, which is, you know, after my own heart. Did she add chocolate chips? I'm trying to remember. I think in one of them there is some form of chocolate. Oh, that's the whole thing. Yes. There's mini banana bread.
I love it. I mean, I only say chocolate chips because it's quite the polarizing choice.
Oh, and I don't understand why. Chocolate and banana, like, what is
Same.
Why would you complain?
Some people do complain, though.
They can go play in their corner of the playground. Stay away from everyone else. I don't care.
Yep. What about the Tannerine book? What drew you to that one?
Well, I love Tannerine as a restaurant. I remember first going there when it was in its original tiny, tiny location where this is in Bay Ridge neighborhood in Brooklyn, where you would just wait. You would wait.
Oh, I remember.
Yeah, right? Yeah. You were there.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, and so I've been loyal to this place for a long time. It's a Palestinian restaurant, absolutely delicious. So Rawia Bashara, who is the chef and owner of Tannerine, she had actually had a cookbook out a few years ago. This is an updated version of that. So it is kind of more of, you know, what you would love and expect from her first cookbook, which is like Palestinian home cooking. Yeah. It's wonderful. It's a beautiful book, and yeah.
Wonderful. Well, let's move on and talk about a single book. And it's close to me because I know the author. It's Pakistan by Maryam Jalani. And I think Maryam is such a terrific journalist. She's written several stories for Taste. And I've gotten to know her over the years, going back 5 years. And I had a little behind the scenes access to the journey of this book. And wow, it really, really turned out to be a remarkable book. And when I saw that you put it on your list, I was like, wow, you've great taste there. It's a terrific book. What drew you to this one?
I mean, it was an easy draw for me. As she says in her introduction, I think this is like the first major cookbook about Pakistani food, and that really excited me because, as she points out in the book, most of what American readers are familiar with is Indian food. They don't understand what Pakistani food is, or they think it's the very same thing as Indian food. And while there is some overlap, because, for obvious reasons, Pakistan also has its own distinct cuisine that is shaped by, the fact that the country shares borders with like Afghanistan, Iran, China, and so there you get all these like influences that are coming in over the borders, which has resulted in a very distinct and also varied cuisine. There's an enormous amount of reporting in this book. It's really impressive. She did a lot of homework, let's just say,
Absolutely.
on this book. And so you're going to get things that you're just not going to get in other cookbooks. And again, I keep saying it's a beautiful book, but it really is a beautiful book. It was put together with a lot of care. And that really comes through on the page. So I was thrilled we could include this book.
Wonderful review of this book just then, and the reportage photography is terrific, and I agree with you, it's a real journalistic book.
Yes.
Not every cookbook doesn't have to be, but
No.
this one is one that the work was put in, and there's these large sidebars that really connect the dots in a great way.
Yeah.
Rebecca, tell me a little bit about third culture cooking. It's a term that we've written about and we've heard, and now there's a whole book, Third Culture Cooking, and it's on your list. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so this is by Zainab Issa. She was an editor at Bon Appetit. And this is like a very personal story, which is something we're seeing in many cookbooks right now. This is her very personal story. She grew up in New Jersey. Her parents, she has like African and Indian heritage, basically. Her parents were born and raised, I believe, in Tanzania. But again, she was born here and grew up here. Third culture refers to, this is a term that was coined, I think, possibly by sociologists, but don't quote me on that. But what it describes is, kids who grow up not like in their country of origin, but in an adopted country where they kind of develop their own, culture, essentially. So it's neither the culture of the country of origin nor the culture of the adopted country, but it's sort of a blend of the two. So this cookbook really conveys this because, you're getting food in here that is like very much like from Zainab's family. There's like what you might call like Indian recipes, for example, but then there's also like recipes that are homages to restaurants she loves in Bushwick. There's just a lot of different foods that, are very particular to her and what she likes to eat and, the influences she grew up with from her family, from various cultures. So it's a really fun book.
Yeah.
It's very lively. The food looks absolutely delicious. It's just, it's a lot of fun. I mean, and my takeaway from this is kind of like, I wish more cookbooks were fun this one is.
But I mean, covering like very important, heavy topics, stories of immigration, stories of othering, these big topics, but and telling that story from a really unique point of view in a singular voice, but also bringing in the joy and making these recipes very much appealing and cookable.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. Like this book, I would say it's very accessible. It's like food you sort of like look forward to making or look forward to having an excuse to make, Well,
let's go to some more books. I mean, let's talk about, we have many titles to cover. Let's talk about By Heart by Haley Catalano. It's somebody who we know here at Taste, and we've definitely been watching her feed. It's remarkable. But now she finally has a book.
Yeah, and I will say the cover of this book is my favorite cover of the season, hands down. It is illustrated. I wish there was more illustration in cookbooks.
We're working on that here.
Really? Okay.
Oh, it's happening.
Oh, good. I'm really glad to hear that because I think it's like something that's so underutilized. I also just love working with illustrators in my own work. So I love seeing like them out in the wild doing beautiful things.
There's a book not on your list called Sesame that has a great illustrated cover. So
really?
I'll shout that one out. Yeah.
Awesome.
Terrific.
Awesome. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
So Haley Catalano, she is a TikToker. I should mention here, I'm not on TikTok, but I know from my colleagues who are in the loop that she is a big deal on TikTok.
Very much so.
She's very approachable. She does a lot of really like fun, approachable food, I would say. It's like things you could make on a weeknight. It's food that is like, fresh and inspired, but isn't necessarily going to like make you be like, oh my God, I have to like run out, to like 3 different stores and, buy 20 different things. It's very much about like using what you have and using like, simple, basic, but very smart techniques. And again, I keep coming back to the cover, but it's sort of like this breath of fresh air, I would say. And I will say, since hearing about her book, I have watched like
you dipped into the reels.
I dipped into her reels, and I can see why she's so popular. She's a lot of TikTok people, whether they're food or not, like I think they think they're being approachable. They are not approachable.
Yeah.
She actually is. I like that.
And I think that's why folks like her so much. And I've heard about people cooking directly from her TikToks and her inspiring people to actually cook, which you can't say about every TikTok, chef or cookbook author. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely.
A few more titles. I mean, you've got so many, and of course, the link is in the show notes to the Great Eater piece about the spring cookbook season. So tell me a little bit about Setting a Place for Us by Hawa Hassan. Eliza and I spoke about it in our spring preview, our first of a few, and we called it out as one we were really looking forward to, and you as well have agreed.
Yeah. So Hawa Hassan's new book, she takes a very interesting approach. Again, you still see some of this like reportage that you're seeing in other books this season as well, because what she does, she looks at the cooking from 8 different countries, countries that like, have all experienced like a lot of upheaval and war, but also a lot of rebuilding and a lot of community. And so what she's doing is just like looking at like different foods from these various countries, but also telling the stories of the people who are making the food, the people she's meeting along the way. So you get this really interesting portrait of not just food, but like, what it's like to live in these countries, because I think a lot of times we as Americans look at, quote unquote, war-torn countries, and we really don't have any idea of like what life might actually be like there. And so she really sort of, I hate to use the word enlightening because that sounds like, it's this kind of like self-righteous and like...
No, that's not her tone at all.
Okay, good. Yeah, but it is enlightening. It's enlightening to read these stories and to see this food. And I think, one thing that I really admire about it, and she did this with her previous cookbook, In Bibi's Kitchen. She followed like a similar sort of model for that book. But I really love books, and Pakistan does this as well, that really take this wide context to the food that they're giving you the recipes for, and not everybody is successful at that. But when people are, it makes a very special book. And this is a special book.
What careful hands, Hawa Hassan has, especially with In Bibi's Kitchen and now this book, Reporter's Eye, great storytelling and reportage photography that, is really important when telling these stories. And it's a remarkable work.
Yes.
I'm really happy it's being published this season. A couple more. Sweet Farm by Molly Yeh.
Oh, okay, this is fun. This is one of the most fun books that's come out this season.
I agree. I got to chat with Molly. We'll have an episode later on, and I got to spend a lot of time with this book. I fully agree.
Yeah. It's funny. Like, I haven't baked out of it yet, but I've bookmarked so many pages. One thing that I will forever love about this book is Molly has an entire section on the cookie salad. Which is, I correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if this is a specifically Minnesota thing or specifically... Well, she doesn't live in Minnesota.
She lives in northern Minnesota.
Oh, she does. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. I get this confused.
She's was in North Dakota before.
That's it.
And she moved. She's now in northern Minnesota. And as a Midwesterner, I'll say the cookie salad is living its best life in the state of Michigan. So
is it really?
Not only Minnesota thing. I agree fully. That salad section made my heart sing.
Oh my God. And also, I grew up in Michigan. had no idea about
Oh,
cookie salads. How did I
Different
not?
part?
Oh, well, Ann Arbor.
You're Ann Arbor. I'm Kalamazoo West Side.
Oh, well, okay.
I
Say
don't
no
know.
more. No,
No,
I'm joking.
I know. We can go off mic about our Michigan diets.
Yeah.
No.
But I shamefully was like completely unfamiliar with the cookie salad. But thanks to this book, I now see a few in my future. But yeah, her desserts are they're just a lot of fun. And she does a lot of things like that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see in a dessert cookbook. I think one of the things that's always sort of distinguished her cooking is, her own Jewish and Chinese heritage that always like comes into her books, and this is no exception. But she's also folding in this like very Midwestern element. But yeah, it's funny. I was just talking about her sprinkle cake recipe. I love it. It's just, and I've never actually made this cake, but I plan to because it's just, it invites you to make this cake and like probably eat the whole thing in 1 or 2 sittings.
It's a bunch of recipes I want to make, but also what I like about Molly's books, they're hilarious.
Yes.
She's a very funny writer and it's very sharp.
Yes.
It's not just like joke after joke. It's like sharp stuff. And also like she's telling the story of her husband's sugar beet farm, which produces sugar, which is what baked goods are made out of. So there's like that connective tissue.
Circle of life.
Yes. Exactly, in Molly's world. And I love the way the recipes are written.
Yeah. And again, that sort of irreverence as well. One of my favorite details in this book so far is she has a recipe for a bed of roses cake. And the bed of roses refers to all these beautiful buttercream roses. So I'm flipping through this recipe expecting to find this tutorial on how to make buttercream roses. And she just flat out says, like, look, you don't need to see photos of my clumsy hands. She's like, go to YouTube, Google it, you'll find it. And so I did. And yeah, you can find a bunch of great tutorials about buttercream roses.
That's pure Molly.
So thank you, Molly.
Yeah, it's such a fresh voice. I love it in cookbooks. A few more. I really like Gersha and from the publisher, quote, a triumphant celebration of Ethiopian Jewish culture. Tell me a little bit about this book.
Yeah, so it's a great book. Okay, so Biji Barhani, many apologies if I'm not pronouncing her name correctly. She's the owner and chef of a Harlem restaurant called Zion Cafe. So she has a really interesting story. Her family and she herself, she was born in Ethiopia as part of the Beta Israel community. That is a community of Ethiopian Jews. While she was growing up, her family fled political violence in Ethiopia to Sudan and eventually made it over to Israel. They made their aliyah to Israel, where she grew up, basically. She grew up on a kibbutz, I think, for part of that time, and then eventually decided she wanted to move to New York. Moved to New York, opened this restaurant. This is a fascinating book, not only because it's just a great cookbook, like the recipes look incredibly delicious. Like, I really want to go home after talking to you about this and make injera.
Yeah.
But there's so many recipes, and she really weaves, and it's not just, Ethiopian recipes, but it's like there's Israeli influences. There's like a schnitzel recipe in this book because schnitzel is popular in Israel, for example. There's a lot of great recipes that, again, look fairly approachable for the home cook, but then she weaves in really these great portraits of like family members of hers, who some of them are still alive, some of them are not. But she also, in doing so, just illuminates the story of like the Beta Israel community and Ethiopian Jewry, which is something that does not, in my opinion, get enough attention. I think there is something like 100,000 Ethiopian Jews in the world, not very many in this country. But this is what I love seeing in cookbooks, though. It's like we have this cookbook that is helping to tell that story and hopefully like bringing more attention to this. So it's a wonderful book.
Well said. And what I love about cookbooks is that it points us towards restaurants we might not know of. I was unfamiliar with the restaurant, and I lived
so
here.
So was I. And I don't live anywhere near it, but now I'm going to bike up there.
I want to go up there. I want to buy this book and really try some of this cooking because Ethiopian Jews, not covered as much in cookbook world. And this is a brand new title. So I'm really excited about that. Well, we've covered a lot of titles and apologies to those not mentioned, but please just click the link. It is a great roundup, such smart writing from your team at Eater. And I just love that you pay such close attention to the cookbook industry. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I asked this question when we talk about, when we have booksellers in for previews and journalists like yourself. And I know we have some folks in the building listening here at Penguin Random House, and I'm sure others in the industry. I want to know like what's missing, because I know you're seeing all these beautiful titles, these incredible stories, but there's still something that you cover the industry so closely. There's something that you really seek for yourself.
I mean, it's a complicated question, right? You know, I think on a more superficial level, let's just say, you know, sort of alluding back to Haley Catalano's book, I really want to see more illustration. And I don't just mean like on covers. I think to sort of draw that out a bit, Good
pun there. Nice.
What's that?
You draw it out.
Oh,
Nice
gosh.
pun.
Yeah, Jesus. That was totally unintentional. But yes, to draw it out. I'm somebody who pays a lot of attention to design, particularly in cookbooks. And you know, there is a lot of gorgeous photography in cookbooks, and I am grateful to that. But I love it when I see things that I'm just not expecting to see in cookbooks, like illustration, for example. I really like that. I want to see more, and I feel like I've been seeing more of this, but one cookbook that I think about a lot from last year was Margaret Eby's You Gotta Eat. And what the genius thing about this book was it sort of took this approach of like, let's be real, not everyone always feels like cooking. Even people who love to cook, a lot of the time don't really feel like cooking, especially if you're tired or you're sick or God knows what else is going on in your life. I really appreciated that book because it was just very honest about the fact that, like, look, on the one hand, we are truly blessed to be able to put food on our tables, right? Nobody should take that for granted. On the other hand, cooking every night can be tiring. And this book really acknowledged that and went with it. And it worked. It worked really well. I kind of want to see more of that, you know? And I think we are in certain respects, like Ruby Tando's book did that same thing and did it really well. Georgia Friedman's Snacking Dinners, which is a book that's coming out this season, also sort of does that, where it's like, sometimes you just want a snack for dinner. I certainly eat that way a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So I want to see more of that for sure.
Love that. Are there any cuisines or any techniques or anything that you are like, wow, I wish there was a book about? This is such a hard question. I've asked like Matt Sartwell this at Kitchen Arts, and even for a bookseller, it can be challenging.
It is challenging because like the thing that always comes to my mind is like I love books about baking, you know, and like there's so many great books about baking, you know, for all different kinds of baking, really. But I think like I think I'm always looking for like that mythical baking book that will have everything I ever want from a baking book.
Yeah.
I don't think it really will ever exist because it's a very personal thing. You know, I think something that gets a bad rap, but that I would actually really like to see more of is like the single subject cookbook.
Yeah.
Like, I love a single subject cookbook. And, like kind of the more esoteric, the better. I want to see something about like cooking with oats, you know?
Yeah.
I want to see something about like cooking with one variety of like canned beans. Like, you know, I don't know. But I think there's something, I want to see people's quirks being more embraced. And I want to see cookbook publishers not be so afraid of taking chances on people who have really unusual worldviews. You know, I think that's something. And look, this is not a knock on anybody's cookbook at all. But I do think there can be a timidity in like really embracing people who have truly unusual voices, who, you know, aren't sanded down into more acceptable shapes and forms. I kind of want to see slightly more punk rock, more anarchy.
Yeah.
I would really dig that. Yeah.
Absolutely agree fully. Yeah. And, you know, it's the tricky, you know, conversation about will it sell?
Well, and I think this is the thing, as you and I well know, it's like we can get very hemmed in by the question of like making money from our content, right? Yeah. And so I think I understand why publishers want to make money, believe me. But I think there has to be room for books to not make money. I mean, look, most cookbooks don't make money. We know this. Mm-hmm. So if most cookbooks don't make money anyway, then why not just go wild? You know, go out on that limb a little further.
Yeah, it's definitely a topic to be continued.
Yes.
I feel I love having you back. I hope you come back. And
Thank
maybe
you.
in the fall you'll come back.
Happy to come back.
Yeah. So have you started fall yet? Have you started looking?
No.
Thank God.
I mean, a little bit. We're in August right now, technically speaking.
Okay,
so we're starting to get wind of things that are coming out. I know Hetty McKinnon, for example, has a new cookbook in the fall, and I'm very excited.
Yeah,
about that.
that's such a terrific author.
Yeah.
We'll have you back to talk more about the season. Rebecca Flint Marks, thank you so much for joining This Is Taste.
Thank you, Matt. It's been a pleasure.
This Is Taste is hosted and produced by Eliza Barbanel and me, Matt Rodbard. The show is edited by lead producer Clayton Gumbert and supervised by Pat Stango, Director of Media Production and Development at Penguin Random House. Thanks to Shalia Harris and the production team at Penguin Random House. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Logo and guest illustrations by Ellie Skurzat. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter to keep updated on all cool things in the world of taste.